In the fields of Renève, in the region of Burgundy, a crowd gathered on a clear autumn morning in the year 613. Nobles, warriors, peasants, and clerics all came to witness a spectacle of power that would remain etched in collective memory for centuries. At the center of this macabre theater, an elderly woman of about 70 years, her body already marked by 3 days of torture, was forcibly dragged to the execution site. Her white hair, which had once been adorned with royal crowns, was now disheveled and dirty. Her eyes, which for decades had astutely observed the intricate power games of the Frankish kingdom, still shone with indomitable fury. Brunhilde of Austrasia, queen, regent, and one of the most powerful political figures in Europe for almost half a century, was facing her end. By order of her mortal enemy, King Clothar II, she was tied by her hair, arms, and legs to 4 wild horses. When the signal was given, the animals were driven to run in opposite directions. The body of the former queen, the woman who had once ruled 3 kingdoms, was literally torn apart before the eyes of the crowd. It was an execution calculated not only to extinguish life, but to destroy any vestige of royal dignity and symbolically erase her existence from the world of the living. No other royal execution in European medieval history would combine such brutality with such political symbolism. To understand how a queen of the noblest lineage came to this atrocious end, we must go back almost 60 years to the beginning of one of the most remarkable and controversial political trajectories of the early Middle Ages. Born around 543, Brunhilde was the daughter of the Visigoth king Athanagild, who ruled Hispania, present-day Spain, from his capital in Toledo. As a Visigothic princess, she received an exceptional education. She was fluent in several languages, versed in classical literature and Christian theology. Contemporary historians note that her literacy and cultural knowledge surpassed those of many male rulers of her time. Brunhilde's destiny as a piece on the board of European dynastic alliances was sealed in 567, when her marriage to Sigebert I, King of Austrasia, one of the Frankish kingdoms that had emerged after the fragmentation of Clovis's empire, was arranged. This marriage had a clear strategic purpose: to strengthen ties between the Visigothic kingdom and the Franks in the face of growing external threats. The young 24-year-old Visigothic princess, educated in the relatively sophisticated court of Toledo, must have encountered a considerable culture shock upon arriving at the more rustic and militarized Frankish court. Still, the chronicles of the time suggest that the union with Sigebert was relatively harmonious, a rarity for arranged royal marriages of that period. The contemporary chronicler, Gregory of Tours, whose works constitute one of the main sources on Brunhilde, describes her as a young woman elegant in all her manners, beautiful in appearance, honest and decent in her behavior, wise in her counsel, and pleasant in her conversation. What could have been just another political marriage between European dynasties was dramatically complicated by what would become the central axis of Brunhilde's life: the deadly rivalry with Fredegund, a figure as remarkable as she was controversial. The rivalry between these 2 extraordinary women would eventually define the politics of the Frankish kingdom for more than 40 years, creating a cycle of vengeance and retribution that would only end with Brunhilde's violent death. Fredegund, of humble origin, possibly a palace servant, had risen to the position of consort to King Chilperic I of Neustria, Sigebert's half-brother, after the mysterious assassination of the king's previous wife. When Sigebert married the noble Visigothic princess Brunhilde, Chilperic, apparently feeling disadvantaged, arranged his own marriage to Galswintha, Brunhilde's older sister. Less than a year later, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. Chilperic quickly elevated Fredegund to official queen. Brunhilde, convinced that Fredegund had orchestrated her sister's murder, swore vengeance. This oath would initiate one of the longest and bloodiest personal conflicts in European medieval history, known as the Feud of the Queens. The conflict assumed truly tragic proportions when, in 575, King Sigebert was assassinated during a campaign against his brother Chilperic. According to Gregory of Tours, 2 assassins using poisoned daggers, supposedly sent by Fredegund, attacked him during an audience. Brunhilde, at 32, suddenly found herself a widow in hostile territory, with her 5-year-old son, Childebert II. Brunhilde's situation seemed desperate. As a foreigner without a husband's protection, her chances of political survival seemed minimal. Historical precedents were not encouraging. Widowed queens were typically forced to retire to convents or were quickly replaced politically. Instead, in a move that would astonish her contemporaries, Brunhilde assumed the regency on behalf of her underage son. This was the first act in an extraordinary political career that would eventually see her exercise authority over 3 Frankish kingdoms, sometimes as regent, sometimes as an advisor to her descendants. What distinguishes Brunhilde in medieval history is the impressive longevity of her political influence. After the regency during her son's minority, she assumed a similar role for her grandsons, Theudebert II of Austrasia and Theuderic II of Burgundy. When Childebert II died prematurely in 595. Even when her grandsons came of age, she maintained considerable influence in the courts, acting as a political advisor, diplomat, and strategist. Her ability to maintain and expand power in a male-dominated society is even more remarkable considering the limitations faced by women in the Merovingian period. Brunhilde not only survived politically, she thrived, forging alliances, manipulating rival noble factions, and conducting diplomatic relations with foreign powers. Her correspondence with Pope Gregory I the Great demonstrates her active engagement in ecclesiastical matters and her ability to use religious connections to strengthen her political position. During her long period of influence, Brunhilde implemented important administrative and infrastructural initiatives. Documents from the period attest to her involvement in reforms of the tax system, restoration of Roman roads, and the founding of monasteries and churches. In Burgundy, certain roads are still known as Chaussée de Bruneau, Brunhilde's roads, lasting testimonies to her efforts to maintain Roman infrastructure. However, the same extraordinary power that she built earned her formidable enemies. The Frankish aristocracy, traditionally accustomed to increasing their power during periods of royal transition, found in Brunhilde a fierce opponent to their autonomy. Unlike many Merovingian monarchs who progressively ceded authority to local aristocrats, Brunhilde consistently worked to strengthen centralized royal power. This conflict with the Frankish nobility became particularly intense during the final years of her political career. As her grandsons matured, attempts to keep them under her influence alienated important segments of the aristocracy. When her grandson Theuderic II died suddenly in 613, Brunhilde, now about 70 years old, tried to elevate her great-grandson, Sigebert II, to the throne of Burgundy. This last political maneuver proved fatal. The aristocrats, led by the palace mayor Warnachar, secretly contacted Clothar II of Neustria, son of her old enemy Fredegund, offering to recognize him as the sole king if he eliminated Brunhilde and her lineage. When the armies met at the Ain River, the betrayal was consummated. The Austrasian and Burgundian nobles disbanded, leaving Brunhilde and young Sigebert defenseless. Captured along with her great-grandsons, Brunhilde was brought before Clothar II, the son of her lifelong enemy, Fredegund, who had ironically died of natural causes in 597. The trial that followed was a mere formality, designed to justify the elimination of the rival dynasty. Clothar accused Brunhilde of crimes that, even by the violent standards of the time, were extraordinary. The murder of 10 members of the Frankish royalty, including kings, queens, and pretenders to the throne. Although modern historians consider these accusations greatly exaggerated for propaganda purposes, they provided the necessary pretext for an exemplary execution. The method chosen for Brunhilde's death was deliberately selected for its political symbolism and extreme brutality. According to the Chronicle of Fredegar, written a few decades after the events, she was first tortured for 3 days, exposed to public humiliation while being led on a camel through military camps. Finally, she was tied by her hair, arms, and legs to 4 wild horses which, when incited to run in different directions, literally dismembered her body. This exceptionally brutal execution was calculated to convey a clear political message: the total destruction of the rival lineage and the affirmation of power of the new order under Clothar II. By physically destroying the queen's body, Clothar symbolically eradicated the political legitimacy she represented. After her death, Brunhilde's great-grandsons were similarly eliminated, the youngest sent to monasteries, and the eldest, Sigebert II, executed. Brunhilde's death marks an important turning point in Merovingian history. With her elimination, the Frankish aristocracy extracted significant concessions from Clothar II, consolidated in the Edict of Paris of 614. This document, often considered a milestone in the rise of aristocratic power at the expense of royal authority, represented precisely the type of decentralization that Brunhilde had fought against throughout her political career. The historical narrative about Brunhilde, as often happens with powerful women, was deeply shaped by her enemies. The chroniclers of the Merovingian era, almost exclusively men and frequently linked to the political winners, portrayed her as cruel, manipulative, and excessively ambitious. The Chronicle of Fredegar, our main source for her execution, was written under the patronage of the descendants of her political enemies. This negative characterization of Brunhilde persisted for centuries, greatly influencing historical perception. Only in more recent times have historians begun to reassess her career with greater nuance, recognizing her considerable administrative achievements and her extraordinary political adaptability in extremely challenging circumstances. Brunhilde's story vividly illustrates the complex power negotiations that female rulers needed to navigate in deeply patriarchal societies. Her ability to exercise authority depended on a delicate balance between conformity with gender expectations, mainly through her role as mother and grandmother of kings, and the assertiveness necessary to survive in the brutal Merovingian dynastic politics. Brunhilde's horrific end serves as a powerful reminder of the unique dangers faced by women who dared to exercise direct power in medieval Europe. The extreme violence of her execution cannot be separated from her gender. It represented not only the elimination of a political rival, but an exemplary punishment for a woman who had transgressed social expectations by exercising authority typically reserved for men. Paradoxically, the spectacular brutality of her death itself helped ensure that Brunhilde would not be easily forgotten. Throughout the centuries, her story has inspired numerous literary works, from the medieval epic Nibelungenlied, where she partially inspired the character Brunhild, to operatic dramas and modern historical novels. Even in her atrocious death, Brunhilde achieved a form of immortality that few of her contemporaries managed. When we contemplate the chilling image of the elderly queen being torn apart by horses in that Burgundian field, we are confronted not only with the brutality of medieval politics, but with perennial questions about power, gender, and the construction of historical memory. The same society that could not tolerate a woman exercising direct authority for so long felt the need to destroy her body with spectacular violence. A testimony, perhaps, to the profound impact that her existence provoked in the power structures of her time. If you liked this video and want to learn more stories of historical female figures who defied the conventions of their times, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive notifications. Leave in the comments which story you would like to see in our next video. Until next time.